The morning seems like any other. It's just another day in a quiet neighborhood, where most of the time, the only real drama is how long it takes to get to work or whether you'll make it to the store before it closes. Maria is a mother of two, the kind of person who's always planning ahead. There's a load of laundry in the dryer, a meeting at work to get through, a dinner to make. Life, for the most part, has a predictable rhythm. Her children are still getting ready for school. Her husband, Darren, is out the door early, another busy day ahead for him as well. It's a world that feels, for the most part, unshakable. But that morning, something is about to change. Maria takes one last look around the house before she heads out. The sun is barely rising, casting a soft glow over everything. Her day has just begun, and for a moment, it feels like everything is in its place. It's just a normal drive. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until the lights flash in her rearview mirror. She doesn't know it yet, but this moment will change everything for her, her family, and the town she's called home for years. What could this be for? A speeding ticket? A broken taillight? The kind of mundane incident that happens every day, but for her, this would turn out to be anything but mundane. The officer approaches. She's already reaching for her wallet, ready to explain. But as he gets closer, something about him seems off. There's a coldness in his eyes that doesn't match his official demeanor. No greeting, no good morning. Just a sharp, clipped question. Do you know why I stopped you? She shakes her head. No, she doesn't know. Everything seemed fine just a minute ago. I'm not sure, officer. Did I do something wrong? Without warning, he demands she step out of the car. Her heart is racing now. The questions pile up in her mind, but no answers come. Why is she being treated like this? What did she do to deserve this? This is not a routine traffic stop. Maria feels it deep in her chest, but she doesn't know how to explain it, even to herself. Everything is spiraling out of her control. Another officer arrives. There's shouting now, but it doesn't make sense. Something's not right. Maria's voice trembles as she tries to ask what's going on, but her words are lost in the chaos. The officers, now agitated, move faster. Maria is shoved against the side of her car, and before she can protest, the handcuffs are on. Her mind races. This is happening too fast. How did this go from a simple stop to something like this? The officers say it's a charge of resisting arrest, but Maria hasn't resisted anything. As they drive away, Maria can only think of her kids at home, waiting for her. What will they say when she doesn't come back? What you don't know yet is that this is just the beginning of a nightmare Maria never saw coming. The story of what happens next is one of injustice, corruption, and a fight for survival against a system that has already decided her fate. Maria Collins doesn't know it yet, but the wheels of a much larger machine have already begun to turn. She's been arrested, falsely charged, and thrown into a system that has no interest in listening to her side of the story. Maria is driven to the local police station, her hands cuffed tightly behind her back. The squad car's lights continue to flash in the rearview mirror, a cruel reminder that this isn't just a mistake anymore, it's real. The further they drive, the more hopeless she feels. The quiet neighborhood she left behind is now a distant memory, and her mind races with 1,000 questions. She hasn't done anything wrong. She knows this in her bones. But the more she tries to explain, the less anyone seems to listen. The officers, cold and impersonal, give her no space to speak. She's treated as if she's guilty from the very start, as though her presence in this small town, a black woman, is enough to make her a threat. At the station, things don't get any better. Maria is processed quickly, but the words that are written on the intake sheet carry a weight she's not prepared for: resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. She feels the sting of disbelief, the sudden understanding that the system has already branded her. The jail cell she's thrown into is cold, barren, a steel cot pushed against the wall. There's no comfort here, no comfort in being treated as a criminal when she knows she's innocent. But as the hours drag on, Maria's initial shock turns into something much deeper, a sharp, sinking sense of dread. And then, just as the reality of her situation begins to sink in, she hears a voice on the other side of the bars, a familiar voice. It's her lawyer, Charles Bennett, the man she thought would be her lifeline in this nightmare. He's a competent attorney, but when he walks in, there's no sign of the confidence she's expected. His face is pale, his eyes tired. The fight in him has already been dulled, and Maria can see it. He sits down across from her, looking as if he's already preparing for a battle he knows he might lose. "Maria," he says slowly, as if considering each word carefully, "I've seen the charges. They're serious." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She can hardly breathe, but she nods, desperate to hear something, anything, that might give her hope. "They're going to make it difficult for you," Charles continues. "This town, there's a lot more going on here than just this arrest." Maria's heart skips. "What do you mean?" She wants to ask, but the words catch in her throat. Charles is speaking in a way that implies more than he's willing to say outright. The room feels smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves are closing in on her. She's about to ask what he means when the door to the holding area opens, and two officers step inside. They stand there, silently, blocking the exit. Charles glances at them briefly, his face hardening. "I'm going to do everything I can," he says, standing up quickly. He presses a small slip of paper into her hand. "Here's my number. You'll need to call me if they try anything else." The officers don't speak as he leaves, but their presence is a quiet threat. Maria is alone again, staring down at the phone number in her hand, wishing she could call her husband, Darren, but knowing it's too soon. The hours pass, and Maria is left to contemplate her fate. Her children, still too young to fully understand what's happening, will be waiting for her at home. The thought of them wondering where their mother is, why she hasn't come to pick them up from school, is almost more than she can bear. But there's something else gnawing at her, something she can't shake. How did it all go wrong so quickly? The answer comes the next morning. The next morning, Judge Randall Perkins enters the case. He's a man who has built a reputation on one thing, getting results. But not just any results. Results that please those in power. His reputation is well known, especially in a town like this, where the lines between law and politics blur at every turn. The press has referred to him as tough on crime, a title that, to most, is a badge of honor. But Maria, standing in the cold, sterile courtroom for the first time, will soon learn that Judge Perkins is not the fair and just authority he appears to be. She sits in the defendant's chair, her lawyer at her side. The courtroom feels too big, the voices of the onlookers too loud, the air too thin. The judge enters with a deliberate step, his robes flowing behind him like the heavy curtain of an impending storm. He sits at the bench, adjusting his gavel with an air of finality, as if the case has already been decided before anyone has even spoken. "Mrs. Collins," the judge intones, his voice cold and sharp. "You've been accused of resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, and disturbing the peace. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Maria's heart races. This is it. This is the moment she's been waiting for, the moment when she can finally tell her side. But when she opens her mouth, the words get caught in her throat. She's been preparing for this, but now, with the judge's stern gaze upon her, she feels small, insignificant. Her lawyer, Charles, stands up, clearing his throat, and begins his defense, outlining the inconsistencies in the charges against her. He argues that she was simply following the officer's instructions, that she had every right to ask why she was being detained. But Judge Perkins doesn't seem to care. His eyes are locked on Maria, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a man named Elliot Granger, stands next, painting a picture of a woman who disrespected authority, who fought back against the police for no reason other than to cause trouble. The words sting as they fall from his lips, and Maria feels the weight of his accusation settle on her chest. The most chilling moment of the day comes when the prosecutor calls for the maximum sentence, pushing for a harsh ruling. Why? Maria can't understand it. She hasn't even been given a chance to explain herself fully. Her lawyer tries to speak up, but the judge waves him off dismissively. "I've heard enough," Judge Perkins says, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "We will reconvene tomorrow for sentencing." With that, he bangs his gavel. The courtroom is filled with the sound of murmurs, but it's a quiet, hollow murmur. Maria's world tilts on its axis as she realizes what has just happened. The system has already decided she's guilty. No matter what her lawyer argues, no matter how clear her innocence is, Maria's fate is sealed. That evening, as Maria sits in her cell, the reality of her situation sinks in deeper. There's no clear way out. The public defenders, the lawyers, the system, they all seem to work against her. The people she thought she could trust are turning away. She doesn't know it yet, but a bigger fight is coming. This is just the first round. The system has shown its hand. It's not just about her case anymore. It's about power, politics, and a deeply entrenched system that doesn't care about justice unless it suits its needs. And as Maria sits in her cell, wondering what tomorrow will bring, one thing becomes clear: the system is now working against her, and she's about to find out just how deep it really goes. The cold steel bars of the cell seem to grow tighter, the air heavier. Maria's mind spins in endless circles, each thought more desperate than the last. She hasn't been allowed to make a phone call. She hasn't spoken to her children. All she can do is wait, and with each passing hour, that waiting becomes more unbearable. The quiet clatter of guards' boots and the muffled voices of other inmates are the only sounds that fill the silence around her. She doesn't sleep. She can't. Not with everything she's facing. Her lawyer, Charles Bennett, promised he would fight for her, but even in his brief meetings with her, she can sense the exhaustion in his voice, the weariness in his eyes. It's clear now that they're up against more than just a bad police officer. This is something much bigger. Something systemic. And Maria, though innocent, is now the target of that system. The morning of her trial arrives, and it feels like 1,000 years have passed in a single night. When they call her name, Maria rises from her cell with her hands cuffed, the harsh metal biting into her wrists as she's led down a cold, narrow hallway. She tries to steady herself, but the weight of everything that's happening presses down on her chest. The courtroom is packed, more than Maria expected. Journalists. Politicians. Spectators. The eyes of the town are upon her, and for the first time, she realizes how much she's been reduced to a spectacle. People who have never met her, never spoken to her, now have their opinions formed based solely on the accusations against her. The whispering in the air is almost louder than the sound of her footsteps. She's seated at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Charles sits beside her, but there's something distant in his demeanor, as though his mind is already half somewhere else. The prosecution, led by Elliot Granger, stands tall on the other side of the room, ready to make his case with the same fervor he's shown since day one. The judge, Randall Perkins, enters the room with a slow, deliberate step. He looks down at the case file before him, then raises his eyes to Maria. His gaze is cold, unreadable. He doesn't even acknowledge her presence before taking his seat. The trial begins with the prosecutor, Elliot Granger, delivering an opening statement that paints Maria as an aggressor, a woman who defied authority and fought back without cause. He speaks with a confidence that borders on arrogance, as if he's already won the case before it has even begun. His words are sharp, precise, and deeply unfair. The defendant, Mrs. Maria Collins, is guilty of defying the law, Granger declares, his voice echoing in the courtroom. When confronted by law enforcement, she chose to escalate the situation, resisting arrest and attacking the officers with violence. This is not the behavior of a citizen willing to cooperate. This is the behavior of someone who doesn't care about the rule of law. Maria feels the sting of his words, but she holds herself together. She knows she has to stay composed. This isn't the time to break down. Her children's faces are what keep her going now. They need their mother. She can't let them down. Charles Bennett rises to present his defense, but Maria can see the uncertainty in his stance. He's good at what he does, but even he knows this isn't just about the facts anymore. This is about power. Politics. And Maria is caught in the crossfire. We are here today because Mrs. Collins was arrested under false pretenses, Charles begins, his voice steady, though there's a weariness that betrays his resolve. She was simply asking questions. She complied with the officer's instructions until things escalated unfairly. Charles recounts the details of the incident. He describes how Maria was pulled over without cause, how she cooperated fully, how she was thrown to the ground and handcuffed despite never resisting. He highlights the officer's behavior, which, according to witness statements, was both aggressive and unprovoked. The witnesses are crucial, Charles knows, but the problem is that none of them are in the courtroom today. The officers who were involved in the arrest, despite being subpoenaed, refused to testify. Their absence speaks volumes. It's a glaring gap that the defense can't ignore. But Charles pushes on, focusing on the one thing he has left, the truth. The prosecution doesn't wait long to challenge the defense's narrative. Elliot Granger rises again, his voice booming across the room as he attacks the credibility of the defense's witnesses. None of these witnesses can prove that Mrs. Collins wasn't resisting, he argues. She wasn't arrested because she was asking questions. She was arrested because she chose to fight back against the officers. The idea that this was an accident, a misunderstanding, is nothing more than a defense built on lies. The tension in the courtroom is palpable as the back and forth continues. Each word from Granger feels like a punch, and though Charles tries to counter with logic and reason, the battle is uphill. The prosecution's case is sleek, well-oiled, and the courtroom can feel the weight of the district's political ties. There are murmurs about the mayor's office being involved, whispers that suggest the officers who arrested Maria are well connected. People are talking, but not about the facts. The worst moment comes when Judge Perkins leans forward, giving his own commentary on the case. His words aren't about justice. They're about control. "I've been on the bench for over 20 years, Judge Perkins says, his voice ringing with authority. And in all that time, I've never seen a case like this where someone doesn't immediately comply with the law. This is an open and shut case." Maria feels her stomach turn as the judge speaks. Open and shut, as if her entire life, her integrity, and her future were nothing more than a formality. The system doesn't care about her truth, her pain, her suffering. It's already decided. She's just another criminal in a long line of stories that never get told. As the trial continues, Maria begins to feel the crushing weight of her isolation. Her lawyer's words blur into the background as her mind drifts to her children, wondering what they think of her now. Will they ever see her again? Will they grow up in a world where their mother is just another victim of a broken system? Hours slip by in a haze of legal jargon and accusations. Charles fights back at every turn, but Maria can tell he's running out of ammunition. The judge is already dismissing his arguments before he finishes speaking. The jury watches on, but their faces remain stoic, unreadable. Maria knows that all they see is what they're told: a woman arrested for resisting police, a woman who didn't know her place. But that's not who she is. Not by a long shot. She's a mother, a wife, a daughter, someone with a life, a history, a future. And yet, in that courtroom, she feels like nothing more than a number in a case file. As the day drags on, Maria's emotions begin to fracture. She doesn't just feel trapped in a courtroom, she feels trapped in a system that has already passed judgment on her. The game isn't about facts anymore, it's about power. And Maria is the pawn. By the time the trial breaks for the day, Maria is no closer to understanding how this happened or what her fate will be. The truth seems irrelevant. What matters now is how much influence those with power can exert over her life. And she's not sure she's strong enough to fight it. The weight of the injustice hangs heavy as she's escorted back to her cell, the trial just beginning but already feeling like it's over. In these tense moments, the trial has exposed the raw heart of Maria's battle. It's not just about proving her innocence anymore. It's about surviving in a system that has already made up its mind. And as the days wear on, one question echoes louder than all the others: who, in this courtroom, is really seeking justice? Maria sits in her cell at night, unable to sleep, her thoughts racing through the endless complications of her case. Every part of her being is consumed by a single overwhelming feeling: the system isn't working for her. It's working against her. And with each new piece of information that comes to light, the web of corruption and influence surrounding her becomes more apparent. For days now, Maria has been trying to make sense of it all. She knows she's not imagining it. Something is wrong. Something much bigger is at play here. Her lawyer, Charles Bennett, has been working tirelessly to gather evidence, to speak with anyone who might shed light on the truth. But something is keeping him from going all the way. Every time he comes to visit her, there's a shadow in his eyes. There's an uncertainty in his voice. He's constantly looking over his shoulder. It's as if he knows something he's not saying. It's not just the prosecutor, Elliot Granger, who's pushing the case with a relentless fervor. No, it's something far more troubling than that. There's a network of people, invisible, unseen, pulling the strings, and Maria's case is just one small cog in their machine. Charles has hinted at it during their last meeting, his words barely audible as if afraid someone might hear. The first hint of what's really going on comes during a seemingly routine meeting between Charles and Maria. It's late in the evening, and the light filtering through the bars casts long shadows over the small visitor's room. Charles enters with a folder, his usual calm demeanor now tinged with anxiety. He doesn't sit down immediately, pacing back and forth, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. When he finally sits across from Maria, he presses the folder into her hands, but his gaze is distracted. "I've been looking into the mayor's office," Charles begins, his voice low. "There's something you need to know. I don't think this is just about you." Maria feels her heart tighten. "What do you mean?" Charles rubs his temples and looks up at her with a pained expression. "Darren, your husband. He's being pulled into this, too. And I don't think it's by accident." Maria feels a chill run down her spine. "Darren?" Her mind begins to race, but before she can speak, Charles holds up his hand. "I can't say much more than that right now," he continues, his voice almost a whisper. "But I need you to be prepared. There are people in this town who have a vested interest in making sure this case goes a certain way. Powerful people." Maria's blood runs cold as she thinks of her husband, Darren Collins, the town's mayor, the man who was always there to provide a sense of security and stability. But this is something different. Something that has already cost them both far more than they ever imagined. As the days go by, the situation becomes clearer. Through quiet conversations and subtle hints, Maria begins to piece together a disturbing picture of what's truly happening. Darren's position as mayor is far from secure. In fact, his political adversaries have been quietly working to discredit him for months. And the best way to bring him down? Destroy the one thing that makes him seem untouchable, his family. And that's exactly what they've been doing. The prosecution, led by Granger, has been far more involved than anyone could have imagined. It's not just about winning a case, it's about sending a message. The town's power players, including business owners, politicians, and law enforcement officials, have all seen an opportunity to undermine Darren's authority. If they can ruin his family, they can ruin him. If they can lock his wife away for good, they'll break him. Maria's arrest wasn't just a random event. It was a calculated move, one designed to force Darren's hand and make him choose between his wife and his political career. The entire town, from the sheriff's office to the courthouse, is working together in a way Maria never thought possible, all to make sure the mayor falls from grace. But as the pieces fall into place, Maria's thoughts turn darker. The more she learns, the more she realizes that Darren's enemies have been orchestrating this for months, maybe even years. The charges against her, the lack of any real evidence, the unspoken connections between the prosecutor and the judge, it all points to one thing: corruption. Maria's mind drifts to her husband. She hasn't been able to speak to him, hasn't been able to tell him about the mounting evidence she's uncovered, or about the strange way Charles has been acting. She can't help but feel guilty. He has enough to deal with, trying to keep his political career afloat while the town circles like vultures. But now, she's certain that the very same forces that want to destroy him are the ones who've set their sights on her. And if they have their way, she'll be the one who falls. Then comes the revelation that sets everything in motion. One evening, Charles comes to Maria with a solemn look on his face, holding up a letter he's just received. His hand shakes slightly as he hands it to her. "It's from the district attorney's office," he says, his voice strained. "They want to settle. They're offering a plea deal." Maria's stomach churns. She knows what this means. A plea deal means pleading guilty, it means accepting responsibility for a crime she didn't commit. It means surrendering to the system that has already turned against her. And worst of all, it means giving up any hope of clearing her name. But then Charles leans forward, his eyes locking with hers. Here's the catch. They're offering a sentence of 5 years. 5 years in prison, but if you accept it, you'll avoid a trial. No more court hearings, no more public scrutiny. The case goes away. Your husband's political career is saved. The scandal disappears. Your children get their mother back. And you get out in 5 years. Maria recoils at the thought. The offer is a calculated move, they know she has no choice but to consider it. 5 years might seem like a small price to pay in exchange for her family's safety. But she knows in her gut that this isn't the end. It's just a way to keep her quiet, to make her disappear. "Do you think I should take it?" she asks, her voice barely a whisper. Charles doesn't answer immediately. He's clearly torn. He knows the offer is tempting, but he also knows what it means, for Maria, for Darren, for everything they stand for. "I think you need to decide if you want to fight," he says finally. "Because if you take the plea, this case will disappear, and we'll never know the truth about what really happened. But if you fight it, if you go to trial, you risk everything. Your freedom. Your family. Your future." Maria's heart pounds in her chest. What do I do? She wonders. It's not just about her anymore. This isn't just her life. It's her family's life, too. The choices she makes will determine everything. But something inside her rises up. She's not just going to sit back and let the system take everything from her. She's not going to let these unseen forces crush her without a fight. The decision hangs in the air as the days pass. Maria knows the consequences of either choice, but she also knows she can't go down without trying to expose the truth. The battle is no longer just about her case. It's about justice. And she's going to fight for it, no matter what. Maria spends the following days in a daze, her mind locked in a fierce internal battle. The weight of her decision is almost unbearable. Every choice seems to be a gamble: accept the plea deal, and walk free after 5 years, but lose any chance of ever clearing her name, or risk it all and push forward with a trial, where the odds are heavily stacked against her. But something stirs inside Maria. She won't let them take her life away like this. The truth matters. Her children deserve to see their mother fight for what's right. And Darren, even though he's caught in the crossfire, deserves to know that she wasn't afraid to stand up for their family, no matter what it cost. So, Maria tells Charles she's not accepting the plea deal. She's going to trial. Charles looks at her, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. He doesn't argue, he knows there's no stopping her now. What she doesn't realize is that her decision has already started to ripple through the very system that's trying to destroy her. And just as things begin to settle, the ground beneath her feet shifts again. There's a murmur among the defense team, whispers that something is off about the judge presiding over her case. Judge Randall Perkins, the man who had seemed so cold and dismissive during the early stages of her trial, has suddenly become a figure of interest. Some of the whispers have turned into questions. And with those questions comes a deeper investigation that threatens to expose the dark history of the very man who holds Maria's future in his hands. It begins with a simple tip-off, a phone call to Charles Bennett late one evening. A source, someone within the courthouse, has noticed something strange about Judge Perkins. He's been handling Maria's case with unusual zeal. He hasn't taken any breaks. He's refused to recuse himself, even when it was clear that the case could create a massive conflict of interest. Charles, ever the diligent lawyer, starts to dig. At first, he comes up with nothing. Just the usual professional history. Perkins had been a judge for over 2 decades, a reputation for being tough but fair, especially in criminal cases. But as Charles pushes deeper, he starts to find hints of something more. Then, a name comes up, Edward Cahill. The name doesn't mean anything to Charles at first, but a quick search reveals something startling. Cahill was a business tycoon, a local developer, and one of the wealthiest men in the area. He'd been involved in several high-profile cases, none of which had ever gone to trial, all of them dismissed under unusual circumstances. Charles's fingers hover over the keys as he digs deeper, tracing the connections. Cahill was known for his business dealings with the city, for his close ties to the local police department, and for his long-running relationships with the political elite. And it didn't take long for Charles to uncover the shocking detail: Judge Randall Perkins was one of Cahill's earliest backers. As Charles uncovers more, a clear picture begins to form. Back in the 1990s, Judge Perkins had been a rising star in the legal world, with a future that seemed nearly guaranteed. But he had a problem: the money he needed to ascend to the highest ranks of local politics wasn't easy to come by. That's when he crossed paths with Edward Cahill, a man with deep pockets and an appetite for influence. Through a series of backdoor deals, Perkins had received campaign contributions, business deals, and lucrative connections, all of which had been masked as routine financial assistance. But Charles's investigation reveals something else: these contributions were no small gestures. They were bribes, payments made to guarantee Perkins' loyalty, his silence, and his future power. And as Perkins ascended to the bench, he remained indebted to Cahill, a relationship that was far more transactional than anyone had realized. The more Charles digs into the judge's past, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just a case of bias, this is something far more dangerous. Perkins isn't simply siding with the prosecution because he believes Maria is guilty. He's siding with them because it's in his best interest to do so. This trial is his chance to solidify his power. And Maria, caught in the middle, is nothing more than collateral damage. What Charles uncovers next shakes him to his core. The final piece of the puzzle comes in the form of an old court document, one that traces back to a time when Perkins had ruled in favor of Cahill's development company in a major case. The ruling had been controversial, to say the least. Several environmental concerns had been ignored, and the construction project had been fast-tracked through the legal system. But what wasn't publicly known was that Perkins had ruled in favor of Cahill after receiving a substantial gift, a percentage of profits from Cahill's future development projects. Charles leans back in his chair, the weight of the evidence sinking in. Judge Perkins had been bought. He had sold his integrity for power and money, and now, Maria was the pawn in his game. The realization hits Maria like a ton of bricks when Charles finally sits down with her to explain what he's uncovered. Her mind races as the dots connect. This isn't just about her arrest anymore. This is about the corruption that runs through the very veins of her town. The mayor's enemies, the corrupt officials, and now, the judge, all of them are part of a machine that's been working together to crush her. And the more she thinks about it, the angrier she gets. She has been wronged. Her children have been wronged. Her entire family has been manipulated, played, and discarded by people who see them as nothing more than stepping stones. And now, she has the power to expose it. But the real question is, how? Charles, ever the strategist, knows they can't just stand there and let Perkins continue to control the trial. They need to act, and fast. If they can prove that the judge has been compromised, then everything about Maria's case could fall apart. But the challenge is immense. The system is stacked against them, and the very people who are supposed to deliver justice are the ones who have corrupted it. Charles begins to prepare a motion for a recusal, a request for Judge Perkins to step down from the case based on the overwhelming evidence of his conflict of interest. He drafts a detailed report outlining everything they've uncovered, the bribes, the deals, the web of connections that have kept Perkins in Cahill's pocket for decades. But as Charles prepares to submit the motion, another chilling thought crosses his mind: what if Perkins has more control than we think? In the meantime, Maria is left to stew in her anger and frustration. She knows the truth now, but how will it change anything? She's a woman fighting a corrupt system, a woman with a history they've already painted in the worst possible light. The odds are insurmountable, but Maria is not a woman to back down. Her resolve strengthens. If exposing the judge is the key to her freedom, she will fight for it with everything she has. Her fight is no longer just about her own innocence, it's about taking down the system that has kept her and others like her oppressed for so long. Maria stands in her cell late one evening, her hands pressed against the cold steel of the bars, staring out into the darkness. Her mind is spinning, the evidence, the secrets uncovered, the looming trial. It feels as if the walls are closing in on her, but deep inside, something has shifted. There's a fire inside her now, a determination that has grown stronger with each passing day. She's not just fighting for her freedom anymore. She's fighting for the countless others who have been victimized by the same corrupt system. This battle is no longer just hers, it belongs to everyone who's ever been silenced, to everyone who's ever felt like their voice didn't matter. It's a fight for justice. In the days leading up to the trial, the tension is palpable. Maria's defense team is working tirelessly, poring over the evidence against Judge Perkins, trying to prepare a motion for his recusal. Charles is pulling in every favor, speaking with reporters, trying to make sure the story is heard. The public is starting to take notice, and with every new detail that leaks out, the pressure on the judge and the prosecutor mounts. People are talking. Maria's name is on the lips of everyone in the town, but it's not just about her case anymore. The entire town is on edge. What is the real story here? The trial finally begins, and the courtroom is electric. The air is thick with anticipation, and the normally silent audience is whispering in hushed tones. For the first time, the truth is out there, and people are starting to ask questions. The defense team lays out their case methodically, pulling back the curtain on the web of corruption that has ensnared Maria. They bring up the bribery, the ties between Judge Perkins and Edward Cahill, and the influence that the local elites have had in shaping the outcome of this trial. Maria watches from the back of the courtroom, her heart pounding as each piece of the puzzle falls into place. She's never felt more certain that she's on the right side of history. This is the fight that will change everything. Then comes the moment when everything shifts. The motion for Judge Perkins to step down is filed, and it feels like the whole world holds its breath. Charles presents his case, pointing to the undeniable evidence of Perkins' conflict of interest, the financial ties between him and the powerful businessman Edward Cahill. The judge, whose face remains inscrutable, listens quietly as Charles outlines the case for recusal. But to everyone's surprise, Judge Perkins doesn't recuse himself. Instead, he brushes off the accusations with a dismissive wave, calling them speculative and unfounded. His cold eyes scan the courtroom, and it's clear that he is not going to let go of his grip on this case. The defense team is stunned. Maria feels the room close in around her, the weight of the injustice almost too much to bear. It seems as though her fight, her attempt to expose the corruption, is being dismissed outright. Her heart sinks as she watches the prosecutor, Elliot Granger, smile smugly at the decision, knowing that the tide has shifted back in his favor. The trial continues, and with each passing day, it becomes more apparent that the cards are stacked against Maria. Despite the growing public outcry, despite the mounting evidence, the system seems to be operating as it always has, in favor of the powerful, the untouchable. Then, the unthinkable happens. The prosecution rests their case, and it's time for Maria's defense team to present their closing argument. Charles stands, looking out at the courtroom, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. He knows this is their last chance. He turns to Maria, who is sitting in the defendant's chair, her hands trembling. She meets his gaze, and in her eyes, he sees the same determination that has fueled this entire fight. "We have laid out the truth," Charles says, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We've shown the corruption. We've shown how the system has conspired against Maria Collins. We've proven that she didn't commit the crime she's accused of. But the question now is not just about whether Maria is innocent. It's about whether we, as a society, are willing to confront the truth about the system that has allowed this to happen." He pauses, letting the words sink in. The courtroom is silent, every eye fixed on him. "But the truth," he continues, "is that the system is not fair. It is not just. And it's time we hold those in power accountable. If we fail here today, we fail everyone who has ever been wronged by this system." The air in the room is thick with tension. The audience shifts in their seats, some looking to the judge, others to the defense team. Everyone is waiting for the final word. Then comes the moment of reckoning. Judge Perkins stands, his gavel raised. His voice cuts through the silence like a knife. Having considered all the evidence, the arguments, and the facts presented to this court, he begins, pausing for effect. "I find the defendant, Maria Collins, guilty of all charges." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. It feels as though the ground has been ripped out from under her. Guilty. The word echoes in her mind. It's the final blow in a battle that has seemed endless, a verdict that she never expected. For a moment, Maria can't breathe. The courtroom is silent, save for the shuffling of papers, the scribbling of notes, the sound of a distant clock ticking. And then, the reality sets in. She has been condemned. But then something strange happens. The prosecutor, Elliot Granger, steps forward with a strange gleam in his eye. His voice carries across the courtroom, but it sounds hollow, distant. "Your Honor," Granger says, his voice sharp and triumphant. "I request the maximum sentence for this defendant. Maria Collins has shown no remorse for her actions, and her actions were clearly premeditated. I ask that she be sentenced to the maximum sentence allowed by law, life in prison." The words hang in the air like a death sentence. The courtroom erupts. Murmurs ripple through the crowd, the audience stunned by the severity of the request. But it's not just the audience that's shocked. Maria's family, sitting in the back, their faces pale with disbelief, can't comprehend what's happening. Charles looks at Maria, his eyes wide with disbelief. But in her, there is something else, a fire that refuses to go out. Her heart races, but her resolve strengthens. She won't be broken. Not now. Not ever. Judge Perkins bangs his gavel again, calling the room to order. His face is unreadable as he glances over the papers in front of him. "The sentence will be handed down in due time," he says, dismissing the courtroom. Maria's world spins as she's escorted out of the courtroom, handcuffed, and led back to her cell. The sentence hasn't been officially passed yet, but she knows what's coming. Life in prison, it's too much to process, too much to bear. She tries to keep her composure, but the tears start to flow. Her fight for justice, all of it, for nothing. The corrupt judge, the lies, the manipulation, it all seems too much. And yet, deep down, Maria knows she can't stop now. There's still a chance. The public outcry, the attention her case has garnered, the growing pressure on the powers that be, it all means that she's far from finished. This fight is not over. Not by a long shot. And whatever happens next, she won't back down. The days following the shocking verdict feel like an eternity. Maria is escorted back to her cell, the weight of the words, "life in prison," hanging over her like a suffocating cloud. But something inside her has shifted. The despair that had gripped her when the judge pronounced the verdict begins to fade, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. The courtroom may have declared her guilty, but Maria knows she hasn't lost the fight. The system may have tried to silence her, but the truth is louder than any prison wall. Back in her cell, Maria stares out of the narrow window, watching the world outside go on without her. The cold bars that separate her from freedom seem to mock her, but as the days pass, she begins to notice something: the world isn't just going on without her. People are talking. People are waking up. The media coverage of her case has ignited a fire that won't be easily extinguished. She had never expected this level of attention. Her case was supposed to be a quiet one, a routine trial in a small town, swept under the rug like so many others. But somehow, her story has resonated with the public in ways no one could have foreseen. The corruption, the injustice, the collusion between Judge Perkins and the local elite, it's all coming to light, and it's starting to shake the very foundations of the system. Across the country, people are protesting. Demonstrations are held in every major city. People who have never met Maria, who don't even know her, are standing up for her, calling for her release, demanding an investigation into the corrupt officials who have ruined her life. Charles Bennett, who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes, is getting calls from everywhere. News outlets, influential politicians, even civil rights organizations are offering support. It's a pressure that the system can no longer ignore. And while Maria sits in her cell, waiting for the next chapter to unfold, Charles is in the midst of a battle of his own. He knows they can't give up. Not now. Charles, ever the strategist, begins to shift the focus of the case. It's no longer just about clearing Maria's name, it's about exposing the entire corrupt network. The evidence is mounting, and with each passing day, more people are coming forward with information. Whispers turn into testimonies. Whistleblowers are stepping out of the shadows, sharing their stories of corruption within the local government, the judiciary, and law enforcement. And then, a breakthrough. A former assistant to Judge Perkins contacts Charles. Her name is Claire, and she had worked for Perkins years ago before becoming disillusioned with the man she had once looked up to. Claire confides in Charles that she had witnessed firsthand the corrupt deals Perkins had made with developers like Edward Cahill, and how the judge had used his power to silence those who spoke out against him. Claire had left the job years ago, but she had kept records, documents that could blow the case wide open. Charles immediately arranges a meeting with Claire. She's nervous, scared, but determined. She hands over a series of confidential documents, evidence of the bribes, kickbacks, and shady dealings that had taken place under Perkins' watch. The paper trail is undeniable. These documents could bring down not only Perkins but also the entire network of people who have been running the town for decades. With this new evidence, Charles prepares to file an appeal. But this time, it's not just a request for a retrial. This is a call for a full investigation into the corruption that has infiltrated the very heart of the justice system. They've uncovered not just Perkins' involvement, but the extensive web of connections between local politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement that have kept the system rigged for years. Charles calls Maria into his office at the prison to tell her what's happening. She's been waiting, her heart heavy with uncertainty, but when he walks in, there's something different in his eyes. Hope. "I've got something," Charles says, handing her the documents Claire provided. As Maria flips through the pages, her eyes widen. These are the smoking guns she needed, the proof that Judge Perkins was never impartial, that he was bought and paid for by the very people who sought to control the town. For the first time in weeks, Maria feels a sense of power, a sense of agency. This is it, the truth is in her hands, and it's going to set her free. The news spreads like wildfire. The media picks up the story, and what started as a local scandal quickly turns into a national phenomenon. Major networks are covering the developments, politicians are calling for action, and public outcry grows louder. It's no longer just a battle for Maria's freedom, it's a battle for the integrity of the justice system itself. The world is watching. Judge Perkins, once untouchable, is now under investigation. The corrupt ties that had once protected him begin to unravel. Even those who had supported him in the past are now distancing themselves, afraid of being caught in the fallout. The pressure mounts, and finally, the authorities are forced to take action. The phone rings in the middle of the night. Maria sits up in her bed, startled, her heart racing. It's Charles. "I've got news," he says, his voice low but urgent. "It's happening." Maria can hardly believe what she's hearing. "What? What do you mean?" "They've started the investigation. The judge is being questioned. Cahill is being questioned. We're getting a new trial, Maria. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's forcing their hand." The flood of emotions hits her all at once, relief, disbelief, but most of all, a deep, abiding sense of justice. The system that had failed her for so long is finally beginning to crack. The truth is coming to light, and there's no stopping it now. The following weeks are a blur. Maria is granted an early release from prison while the new investigation takes place. The case is reopened, and the evidence presented by Claire and the other whistleblowers forces the authorities to act. In a shocking turn of events, Judge Perkins is removed from the bench, and the entire trial is declared a mistrial. But the real victory comes when Maria is officially cleared of all charges. The jury delivers its verdict, not guilty. The courtroom erupts in applause, and Maria's heart races as she hears the words she's waited for. The crowd is cheering, but all she can think about is her children, her family, the people who never stopped believing in her. But even as Maria walks free, the battle is far from over. The corruption in her town has been exposed, but the fight to ensure it never happens again is just beginning. Maria knows she will continue to fight for justice, to make sure the system is reformed and that those who were complicit in her wrongful conviction are held accountable. This is the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for everyone who has been silenced, for everyone who has suffered under the weight of a system that does not serve them. Maria's journey has not just been a personal battle, it's become a symbol of resistance, of hope, and of what's possible when ordinary people stand up against a broken system. As she walks free, her name is no longer just that of a wrongfully convicted woman. It's the name of a fighter, a champion for justice, and the voice of those who've been oppressed for far too long. Her release is celebrated across the country. Thousands of people rally behind her cause, standing in solidarity with Maria and the countless others who have been wronged by the very institutions meant to protect them. But this moment, as monumental as it is not the end of the fight. In fact, it's just the beginning of a much larger, much more important movement. Maria knows that her freedom didn't come easily, it was won through the bravery of countless individuals who risked everything to expose the truth. It was won by those who believed in her when the system tried to break her. And now, as she takes her first steps back into the world, she understands more than ever that this fight is far from over. The corruption she uncovered, it's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern. A pattern that exists in cities across the country, in systems of power where the rich and the influential get away with the unthinkable while the powerless suffer. Maria's case was one of many, but it doesn't have to be the last. And so, she calls on all those who have followed her story, all those who have been inspired by her struggle, to take action. This is a movement that belongs to all of us. It's not just about one woman's fight for freedom, it's about a nationwide movement for justice and reform. I didn't do this alone, Maria says in an interview just days after her release, her voice steady and resolute. I had people who believed in me, people who refused to let this story die. And now, we need to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. We need to stand up. We need to fight for the voiceless, for those who have been ignored or forgotten by a system that should be protecting them. She pauses for a moment, looking directly into the camera. This is bigger than me. This is about all of us. It's about creating a world where the powerful can't abuse their power without consequence. Where the system actually serves the people it's meant to protect. Maria's voice continues to resonate with millions. Across the country, conversations about corruption, about criminal justice reform, and about the deep, systemic inequalities that still plague communities are finally being heard. More people are speaking out. More whistleblowers are coming forward. The story of Maria's fight is sparking a conversation about the truth that so many have tried to bury. But the question remains, what can we do to make a difference? Now, it's time for you, the viewer, the witness, the believer in justice, to step up. Maria's case is a powerful reminder that the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard the system tries to hide it. It's a call to action for all of us to remain vigilant, to question the systems that govern our lives, and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Maria's fight may have been the catalyst, but the movement is just beginning. The real work is in the hands of people like you. You have the power to bring about change. You have the power to stand up for what's right. And so, as we close this chapter of Maria's story, the message is clear: it's not enough to just watch. It's not enough to just listen. We must act. We must push for the reforms that are so desperately needed. We must fight to make sure that no one else ever has to endure the injustice Maria faced. Together, we can create a system that works for everyone. Together, we can ensure that truth prevails. Maria's story has shown us that one voice can change everything, but only if we stand together, united in the fight for justice. The time for change is now. If you've been moved by Maria's journey, if her story has inspired you, please don't stay silent. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Let's continue the fight. Let's ensure that Maria's victory isn't the last. Together, we can ensure that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep the system tries to bury it. This is just the beginning. Now, it's your turn.